Hey everybody, welcome to my knot channel. In this video, we're going to look at the most important knots you can learn in your first year of learning knots. The knots we're going to be looking at will be focused on the 5 main categories of knots, which are bend knots, binding knots, hitch knots, loop knots, and stopper knots. Of course, there are a few other categories of knots, such as splices and coils. However, these knots are focused on the knots which you will most likely need in everyday life. Let's get started. The half knot. The half knot is a binding knot, meaning it's used to bind together an object or multiple objects. Now, the half knot might not seem like much and on its own is not the best for binding most items together. However, as a foundation knot, you'll see its structure in many other knots. The square knot. The square knot is a perfect example of another knot which has the half knot in its foundation. The square knot is also known as the reef knot, and like the half knot, is a binding knot. You can use it to join 2 ropes together, which would put it in the category of knots known as bend knots. However, as a bend knot, it's relatively insecure, and so its purpose is much better as a binding knot. The overhand knot. The overhand knot is a stopper knot, and you can see that it is a half knot, except cinched up on its own. Stopper knots, like the overhand knot, are used to prevent a rope from passing through a hole or a device, like this cleat for an example. The slip knot. A variation of the overhand knot is the slip knot. Again, the slip knot has the half knot as its foundation. This time we pass the tail end back through the hole before cinching up the knot. When it comes time to untie the knot, all we need to do is pull the tail end and the knot collapses. The Marlin spike hitch. A variation of the slip knot is the Marlin spike hitch. This time we tie the slip knot mid-line and we're able to pass a device like a Marlin spike through the loop so that we can pull on the line much easier. The figure-eight knot. A slightly more robust stopper knot is the figure-eight knot. Like the overhand knot, the figure-eight is used to prevent a line from passing through a hole or a device, like this pulley. The half hitch. If we anchor our rope to an object using a half knot, this knot is called a half hitch. The slippery half hitch. A slippery half hitch is a variation of the half hitch, except like the slip knot, we have the tail end pass through so that it can be easily released when we're finished. The noose. The noose is one of the easiest hitch knots, tied with a half knot around the standing line. The 2 half hitches knot. For a more secure hitch knot, we can add an additional half knot, creating the 2 half hitches knot. We can also see in the 2 half hitches that as we tie it, we create our next knot, except tied on the standing line. This knot is called the clove hitch. The clove hitch. Another foundation knot is the clove hitch. We'll see the structure of the clove hitch in a few different knots, and a benefit of the clove hitch is that it can be tied a few different ways, around a rail or an open post. The cleat hitch. If we tie a clove hitch on a cleat, it becomes the cleat hitch. The buntline hitch. If we tie a clove hitch on its own standing line, then it becomes a knot known as the buntline hitch. The figure-eight hitch. We looked at the figure-eight as a stopper knot, and it can also be tied to anchor a line, and in this case, it's known as the figure-eight hitch. Okay, so I'm going to interrupt briefly to take a moment of your time and let you know about a new book that I've just published called Design Your Life for Peak Outdoor Experiences. Right now, for the next few days, I'm giving away free ebook copies to my viewers and subscribers. A link in the description. The Siberian Hitch. Another hitch knot using a figure-eight tied to the standing line is called the Overhand Hitch, otherwise known as the Siberian Hitch. The round turn and 2 half hitches. When we make a couple wraps around our anchor point and then tie a 2 half hitches, we complete a knot known as the round turn and 2 half hitches knot. The rolling hitch. A more secure version of the clove hitch is the rolling hitch. There are 2 different ways to tie the rolling hitch, and both are acceptable. The slipped rolling hitch. If we want a quick release rolling hitch, then we can tie the slipped rolling hitch. The Taut-Line Hitch. If we tie a rolling hitch on the standing line, then we create a knot known as the Taut-Line Hitch, which is a type of slide and grip hitch knot. The Constrictor Knot. If we want a much more secure form of the clove hitch, we have the Constrictor Knot. But be careful. Sometimes the Constrictor Knot becomes incredibly tight and may need to be cut off. However, the Constrictor Knot can be used as a very good binding knot. The Cow Hitch. Another foundation knot is the Cow Hitch. Not very secure on its own, the Cow Hitch can be tied much more secure when we tie the Pedigree Cow Hitch. the Lobster Boy Hitch. When we tie a cow hitch on its own standing line, we tie what's known as the Lobster Boy Hitch. The Prusik Knot. With a Prusik loop in hand and using the basic cow hitch, except with a few more wraps, we can create the Prusik Knot, which is a great sliding grip friction hitch. The Becket Hitch. Similar to the half knot, the Becket Hitch is a basic knot. However, its structure can be found in many other knots. The sheet bend. When we use the Becket Hitch to tie two ropes together, we create a knot known as the sheet bend. The slipped sheet bend. If we want a quick release way to join two ropes together, then the slipped sheet bend is a good option. The double sheet bend. If we want to make the sheet bend more secure, then we just need to add another wrap and we can tie the double sheet bend. The Bowline. A fixed loop knot that has the Becket hitch in its structure is the Bowline, which finishes with the tail end on the inside of the loop. The Cowboy Bowline. If we want the bowline to finish with the tail end on the outside of the loop, then we create the Cowboy Bowline. Okay, so we've seen quite a few knots already, and you might have some questions about these knots and the ones coming up. I have to say there are a lot of different resources available to learn knots, books, videos, forums, but if you're really interested in learning knots, then I recommend you check out the Knot School. The Knot School is the only private fraternity and learning platform for learning knots. I hope you check it out. The Eskimo Bowline. If you're looking for a loop knot that's more secure than the bowline, then the Eskimo Bowline is a very similar knot and has proven to be more secure. Although its tail end will be sticking out the side and may interfere with your other rope work. The Yosemite Bowline. A better way to tie a secure bowline is the Yosemite Bowline. The Overhand Loop. One of the first loop knots we often learn is the Overhand Loop. However, the Overhand Loop, after it's been loaded, can be very difficult to untie. What's great about the overhand loop is with a little modifying, we can create a knot known as a bowline on a bight. The bowline on a bight. The figure-eight loop. Using the same structure as a figure-eight stopper knot, except tied on a bight, we can create the figure-eight loop. The directional figure-eight. If we want our loop to be in direction with our working line, then we can tie the directional figure-eight. The double figure-eight loop. And if we want a much more beefier, secure loop knot, then we have the double figure-eight loop. The overhand bend. Going back to the half knot, if we tie two ropes together with a half knot, we end up with the overhand bend. The fisherman's knot. If we want a slightly more secure knot and easier to untie and still use the overhand knot, then we have the fisherman's knot. The Ashley Bend. There are a few different ways to tie two ropes together using the half knot or the overhand knot, and the Ashley Bend is one of them. When we tie the Ashley Bend, we end up with a secure knot with both tail ends together on one side. The water knot. The water knot is another example of a bend knot using the overhand or half knot. We tie it by first creating a half knot and then follow through with our second line. The Zeppelin Bend. The Zeppelin Bend is likely one of the most popular ways to join two ropes together, probably because it has a very cool name. Like the previous bend knots, the Zeppelin Bend is again tied with two half knots. This time, the tail ends terminate pointing away from each other. The butterfly bend. Another way to join two ropes together using the half knot or overhand knot is the butterfly bend. Again, similar to the Ashley bend. When finished, the butterfly bend has both tail ends terminating together, pointing in the same direction. The butterfly loop. The butterfly loop shares the same structure as the butterfly bend. However, it creates a midline loop knot. The one-way knot. In case you don't like joining ropes together using the half knot or overhand knot, there are ways like the one-way knot where we can join two ropes together using the figure-eight. With the one-way knot, we have both of our tail ends pointing in the same direction and laying relatively flat against one of our standing lines. The figure-eight bend. An alternative way to join two ropes together with the figure-eight is the figure-eight bend. This time, when we tie the figure-eight bend, our tail ends terminate pointing away from each other. So those are the knots that I would consider the most important to learn in your first year of learning knots. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching, and please don't forget to check out the links that I'm providing in the description and pinned as a comment to this video, and go get a free copy of my new book. Thanks for watching.